right, everyone. Welcome to my very first ever podcast. This is super exciting. This is Mr. Nunn here, or as all my friends call me, just plain old Nunn.
Or the beard.
And I'm the beard.
I'm Mr. Chitwood. We're hoping that through today's podcast, we're going to, one, show you guys that, hey, we're still alive, one. And two, we're thinking about you guys. And we are also thinking about history, and we're thinking about the current climate of the world right now and what we're going through. And hopefully through this podcast, we can not only see more of who we are as individuals, who we are as a society, but also think a little bit more about the content that we love, that is history.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely. So it has been one of my things for a very long time. I've wanted to do kind of a joint lecture with Chitwood. I think he's one of the coolest teachers on campus, one of the most groundbreaking. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to kind of do something that is kind of not really cross-curricular, but cross history.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of U.S. history, and I do a lot of GovEcon. So
yeah, and we're actually kind of at a nice crossroads right now for both of our classes. Naturally, with the school closure, we have both kind of had to be a little bit flexible in terms of where we're at and what's the subject that we're kind of thinking about in terms of GovEcon or in my case, world history and history of the Americas. But something that we both found were at a pass and kind of had something mutual in both subjects was that we're about to start talking about slavery and the Civil War, be it in GovEcon, U.S. history, or history of the Americas. That's generally where we're at in our pacing guides. That's where we kind of wanted to touch on today. But we also want to talk about other things, right?
Yeah,
we had
absolutely.
things like what we're doing to keep ourselves busy with the school shutdown.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with that.
yeah.
What are we doing to keep ourselves busy? I know that I have 4 kids at home, and so we are doing lots of online learning. So we are still doing kind of homeschooling at home. I've been able to go out and do PE with my kids. That's been what my wife tasked me with doing. So I've gone out and done bike rides with the kids. Yesterday, Joseph and I played football for a while. It was kind of fun. Please. You've seen me before. I do not run.
Yeah, so I mean, same here, except not 4 kids.
You've been going out with your 4 kids?
I got a couple dogs that we've been taking on more exercise. We've been going on walks and exploring the trails around our house since we're still kind of getting new to the area and understanding what is around us. But I mean, I've hit the gym more in the last 3 days than I have in the last 3 months. Yes, because it's in my garage. So I mean, that's been nice, is kind of waking up and going to the gym and actually taking care of myself a little bit more than I had been. Another thing that I haven't done for a while is me and my wife are actually in the process of doing a 1,000-piece puzzle, which I think is a thing with most families throughout the United States right now. Is like the school shutdown happens and then we do a puzzle for the first time ever. So I mean, it's been a fun process to go through with her, and it also is, the puzzle is on a small coastal town in Italy on Cinque Terre. So I mean, it's giving me like this kind of withdrawals from my Italy trip and wanting to go back there, even though the status of Italy with the whole COVID-19 thing is not that great, but it's giving me flashbacks to where we
when it was great.
When it was great, yeah.
So, you know what we need to do? We need to make Italy great again.
We do need to make Italy great again. So
yeah, no,
the whole thing that we can do with that is social distancing and following the kind of directive to try to help everybody out, not just ourselves.
Yeah, if we can prevent people from getting new cases of this crap, it'll eventually go away and we can get back to life as usual. I know that I was looking forward to some baseball, and for the first time ever, I bought season tickets to the A's this year, and I was
nice feeling,
so excited to go and watch, and now I don't get to go watch.
Yeah, we'll just have to put it on hold. But, I mean, sometimes there are the things that take precedence. Sometimes there's more things that are important. Our health, our safety, our family, our friends, making sure that all that is going on, and then we can figure out all the other stuff later on.
Well, speaking of social distancing, should we even be in the same room doing this kind of thing?
We get 6 feet apart, right?
Yeah, 6 feet.
Yeah. I think the best we can do is just be in solidarity with one another, trying to do what is asked of us by our local agencies, state agencies, federal government, all that kind of stuff. But also just common sense, wash your hands, practice good general hygiene, all that kind of stuff. It's best practices in this situation and in future situations when we don't have to worry about this pandemic that's going on.
Absolutely true. Yeah, just focus on being your best person. Be the best you can be.
The fact that I'm walking through Target and I don't see any soap on the shelves anymore is unsettling, because it makes me think, whoa,
what have you been doing?
What have you been doing with your hands? Have you not been washing your hands? And I don't even want to know what that means about the toilet paper.
Oh, jeez.
So
maybe everyone has bidets and you just didn't know it.
Oh, that's true.
Maybe you're behind on... Maybe
behind on the bidet train. Okay, gotcha. All right,
wow,
we're getting
disgusting.
Yeah, maybe we should move
gross.
on.
You're a bad person.
So, what we wanted to talk about in terms of the content today was talking about the Civil War, since that was a shared kind of theme where we're at in both classes.
Well,
Granted,
kind of a shared interest as well.
And a shared interest.
I know that when I was growing up, it was the Civil War that caught my attention. It's what made me love history.
And when I was going through my undergraduate degree at UCSC, I studied primarily the history of the Americas and Africa. And one of the most interesting classes that I ever took was a class by Kate Jones on the Civil War. And it was something that really kind of piqued my interest again in historical research through one of the last kind of tail ends of my undergraduate career there before I started becoming a teacher.
Yeah.
It was one of the last things that I really put a lot of heart and soul into in terms of undergraduate research. So I got a couple things that I wanted to share about that.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about the Civil War is it really just had lasting impacts on the United States. I mean, you can look at the United States still today and see some of the results of the Civil War. See kind of where we've been and why we feel the way we feel about certain things.
Exactly.
So it's definitely very, even though it was 150, 60, almost 160 years ago now.
Well, 1861 to 1865 would be about 135 years. I'm terrible at math too. You guys all know that. 135 years to 2000. So add an extra 20, that's 155.
Yeah, it's
so
been a while.
About 150 years out. So, well, let's start at the top then, huh?
Yeah, let's start right at the
start with
top.
the 1860s election. So give us a little context there.
So if you think America is divided now, you should have definitely been around in the 1850s. The 1850s, you have a lot of states' rights versus federal government rights. So you have states still trying to figure out what their powers were in the Constitution. When we get to the doorstep of the Civil War, we're only about 60 years out from the Constitution being ratified. So the Constitution's still a very new document. We're still a very new government. We're still trying to figure out who we are as a country.
And those of you that have been in my History of the Americas class, we just wrapped up our unit on nation building in the Americas. So you guys know that we're still in a pretty fragile state following the ratification of the Constitution, with internal improvements spreading across throughout the United States, and also Manifest Destiny, trying to figure out what borders define the nation, but also what mantra define the nation. And when it's coming down to this identity crisis, we're going to see that really pop up in two specific regions. That is the North and the South. So in the North, you have a really industrialized economy. You have a society that is more populous in terms of dense populations in these urban city centers compared to more of a rural society in the South. And there's going to be two main differences that really pop up within these two regions based off of their regional identity.
Well, but also, I mean, you have even more going on than just that. in the lead up to the 1860 election, you have Lincoln, who's a Republican and is vocally anti-slavery, is opposed to slavery, says he will do what he can to abolish slavery.
And before we move forward, we should identify that the idea of party lines in terms of Democrat, Republican is different back then, right? You had the Republicans, you had Democratic Republicans.
You had Democratic. You still had the Whig Party.
You still had the Whig Party
was
then,
around.
yeah, I know.
Lincoln won his first. No, won? Did he win? I think he lost his first election as a Whig.
We'll figure it
I'm
out.
pretty sure he lost. I think the first election he actually won was to the presidency. He lost a lot, which is impressive.
We'll
So
figure it out.
well, what that proves is you can be a loser and still be considered the greatest ever. I think
is true.
everyone thinks that President Lincoln was one of our best,
Like
and
I said,
he lost more than he won.
I think there's a good hashtag that both of us really embody. That is hashtag fail until you don't, right?
Fail until you don't. Absolutely right.
So yeah, as it seems, President Lincoln's his first election into office. His first success was in 1846. That is when he became a U.S. House
U.S. representative, yep,
Um,
from Illinois. So, I mean, back in those days, Illinois is not
Actually,
the big powerhouse you think
Correction,
it is
that would
now.
have been in 1834 is when he was
Whew,
first a
that was a
member of
long time ago.
the House
Yeah,
of
but that's
Representatives.
Illinois House of Representatives. That's
So-
not U.S. House.
But first elected office was
Correct. You got to start somewhere.
So
But back then, I mean, Illinois was not this big, strong powerhouse as you think of it now.
So prior to 1854, Lincoln was a member of the Whig Party. Then from 1854 to 1864, he was a member of the Republican Party. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this was a thing. Between 1864 and 1865, there was this thing called the National Union Political Party.
Really?
Yeah, interesting. We'll have to do some more
So-
more research on what that is. But I
Fun,
have-
educational, historical fact.
Yeah, I
That
have.
doesn't matter.
Does not matter. So,
So yeah, anyways, in this 1860 election, it's really kind of a bizarre election. You have Abraham Lincoln as a Republican, but then you have Stephen Douglas as a Democrat, who's also from Illinois, and then you have John Breckinridge from the South, also a Democrat. So you have two Democrats and one Republican running for president.
interesting. That sounds very similar to current climate that we're in
I
now.
know, bizarre, right? But the reason that there were two Democrats running for president is Stephen Douglas refused to say that he would keep slavery. He was somewhat opposed to slavery, while in the South, they definitely wanted to keep slavery. So in the South, they nominated Breckinridge to run for president. And so you have this splitting of the Democratic votes in the 1860 election, which makes it easier for Lincoln to carry all of the North and not need to carry any of the South.
And let's remember that, this is politics as it is still today, right? These three members that are trying to vie for office are trying to do what they can to win the election. They
Absolutely.
naturally have their own political opinions. They have their own ideologies and goals for the country and where they want to take it. But at the same time, with politics, and you know this firsthand teaching government too,
I do.
is you have these politicians that are pandering also to their audiences and audiences that they're looking to reach and try to gain their vote, I guess you could say, prior to the election. So while some of these positions may not have been what they originally had intended, there is a grain of salt that we need to look at through the political lens and landscape is what are these ideals and broader ideologies behind these political candidates? What are they willing to budge on and what are they not willing to budge on?
Absolutely.
And I think for the nation, leading up to this time period, Lincoln kind of emerged as that favorite among many.
Well, and that goes once again back to what you talked about a little bit ago when you talked about how the North was far more populous than the South. And so in the electoral system that we have, sure, the popular vote is important, but what it really does is it determines the electoral college vote. And so when you have more people living in the South, you're going to have more electoral, or in the North, you're going to have more electoral college votes in the North, which means that Lincoln will be able to get more votes without actually having to carry any of the states in the South. And
Yeah.
he'll still be able to win the election, which is kind of what pisses off the South a bit, because they don't want Lincoln. They want someone who's going to favor more of their ideals and their beliefs, and one of the big issues is slavery.
And looking at the context leading up to this, you know, you've constantly had this growth of the United States and the admission of states into the Union. There's been this discussion of whether or not certain states, when they are admitted to the Union, are going to be admitted as a slave state or as a free state. So there's this kind of balancing act that the nation had been playing in terms of trying to keep everybody at bay in terms of the topic at hand, that is slavery, and trying to not only satisfy those that were trying to maintain it for economic purposes, but also those that were trying to push back against it based off morality and ethical reasons, and trying to just get rid of something that they felt was unethical and is unethical. So what it leads us to is that in 1860, we have this breakdown where the popular vote swung in
It was
Lincoln's favor.
pretty substantial,
Where we have the popular vote for Lincoln at 1.8 million, and you have John Breckinridge that comes in at about 848,000. So we're looking at
What was
roughly
Douglas at?
a million.
He shouldn't
difference.
have gotten much. Was he a
Douglas,
distant third?
Douglas came in at about 1.38. So I mean, he was a distant second.
So he's gonna carry the Democrats of the North.
But really,
is what's gonna happen there.
And what we saw here is that he kind of split the party
Yeah.
between Breckinridge, Lincoln, and Douglas in terms of being Democrats, and then we also have Lincoln being a Republican. Really, there was 4 main nominees during this time period, and that really spread votes, I guess you could say, thin. But what ends up resulting in is that we have Lincoln carrying roughly 39% of the vote, Douglas carrying about 29%, and then Breckinridge coming in at 18%.
So, spoiler alert, what we're saying here is Lincoln wins the election.
Lincoln wins the
That's
election.
the spoiler.
Exactly.
So, Lincoln becomes our 16th president. And then the South says, hell no, we're not having that. And so you start to see the split with America. So, Lincoln's going to take office, I believe it's March of 1861. I believe that's when they took office back then. And so not long after that, you're going to see the first state secede. So in April of 1861, the first state to secede, I think we all know, is South Carolina. So they are the first state to secede, and several other southern states secede as well, leading to the creation of the Confederate States of America in 1861, and their election of Jefferson Davis, as their president. And so we're looking at now, why did the South feel that they had to leave the Union in order to be the country that they wanted to believe or be? Why did they feel like they couldn't be a part of America anymore? Because let's be absolutely honest, that's what they did. They left America. They said, bye America, we'll see you later.
And this has kind of echoes and shades of what we still see today. You know, with this, there you might have heard of things like the state of Jefferson, people calling for regions of California and Oregon to secede from the state of California to create their own state within the Union of 51
I've
states.
thought about that now. So I've thought this whole time that the state of Jefferson maybe was in reference to Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers. But what if it's instead
Jefferson
a
Davis?
reference to Jefferson Davis,
could
the
be.
first president of the
I didn't
Confederacy?
think about that before.
I never thought
always
of that
about
either.
it the same way, but
That's interesting.
It would hold a lot of echoes of what we're talking about
would.
here with the Civil War.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you mentioned 2 main issues, you know, that or just some main issues that brought the southern states ultimately to seceding from the Union. One, namely being slavery, the institution of
Well,
of
but let's frame that.
slavery
Let's
here.
frame that the right way. I mean, the
so-
way that you're going to sell it to all Southerners, because most Southerners were not slave owners.
That is true.
A vast majority, probably, I think it's somewhere around 95% of Southerners were not slave owners.
It's true.
So how are you going to get that 95% to buy into your war?
Economics.
Economics, yes. So, and government.
Yeah,
We're going to be
government
talking
economics.
about the government coming in and taking away your way of life. The government can kind of
Liberty,
just
freedom.
liberty, freedom. The government can just come in and tell you what to do, and that is not what America stands for. So one of the big issues of the 1840s, 50s, 60s really is states' rights versus federal rights.
Yep.
Does the federal government have the right to tell the South they can't own slaves? Does the federal government have that right?
And many people throughout the South would argue no at this time period. I think many people
around
just
the world
in general
today
yeah,
would still argue that same thing.
is that we're still kind of struggling with this idea of federalism. We're struggling with this idea of having a nation founded on liberties and principles of democracy and being able to have this kind of social contract with the government that's saying that, you know, we give you the power, therefore you take a bit of our individual liberties, but we also expect some of our liberties being safeguarded. And when that doesn't happen, and namely being in this scenario, some of these people throughout the South that felt strongly in urging secession from the Union urged for this to happen because they felt that the government was no longer upholding that social contract. But on the flip side, we have this kind of polarized opinion in the North. We have this polarized opinion in the North where people are feeling that we're setting aside maybe some of these federal principles or federalism principles, I should say, where we're understanding, yes, there's a relationship between states and the federal government, but we are transcending and growing in our development of the nation from where we were roughly 40, 50 years ago with the ratification of the Constitution. And prior to that with the Declaration of Independence, where we set upon a basic set of principles for our nation that all men were created equal. And therefore, we need to start upholding that mantra. And that brings upon this idea that slavery cannot continue in the Union. So we have these main issues between slavery, states' rights. And I would argue that there is this a third alternate route that we should think about in terms of
Is this that bombshell you said you were going to
yeah,
drop
this is
on
the
me?
bombshell.
All right.
Is that in my UCSC days when I was a researcher, as Mr. Nunn grabs a bag of chips that we put up here because we figured being up here we'd be hungry at some
I'm a little
point.
hungry. A little peckish.
Pink
I think
Himalayan salt kettle chips.
they're delicious.
It's $2.99 at Costco. I'm not
Wow.
sure if they're still in stock since the last time I went to Costco there was not much, especially not toilet paper, eggs, milk, or any of the other basic necessities.
But you can get milk and eggs at Juanita's Market over
Ooh,
on Grantline,
fantastic.
so head
I'll
on
think
over
about
and get
that.
it.
But the bombshell that I was going to drop is through my research, one of my main misunderstandings was at some point there's got to be somebody in the nation, primarily the South, that feels as if there was something more to them than states' rights. There's something more than slavery that they cared about. Because the common perception is that all Southerners, as we kind of debunked already, but all Southerners just supported slavery, which was just not true. And many of them, like you said before, were not slave owners. However, I came across one story one time, and it had to do with this gentleman that was a slave owner in the South going into the Civil War, and felt so strongly to the duty of his country and the liberty and the principles of liberty and democracy, and felt that despite his own economic interests in having the institution of slavery remain,
Yeah.
And even with the secession of the South from the Union, he decided to uproot his entire life and left his wife and his kids, as terrible as that sounds, to defect to the Union, to ultimately become a spy for the Union on Confederate troops throughout the
wow.
entirety of the Civil War. So
Yeah.
he was a slave owner that left his entire plantation and his way of life with his family to defect to the Union, to basically help the Union win a victory, because he felt so strong, a strong sense of duty to his country,
Yeah.
that he did not want to go along with those secession principles.
Interesting.
And I think the book is that I got this from was Chickasaw Civil War Scout. Let's get the
Well,
total.
my guess is though is that that's not that unusual, because when you think about the institution of slavery, and you think about the ideals and the morals of the time, you're still talking about a time period that is highly religious, that is highly into like what's proper and what's not. I feel like a lot of people would have issues with the institution of slavery. And walking around, I mean, even today, walking around and seeing people who don't look like you, wouldn't it be really hard to look at them and be like, oh yeah, they're not as good as me? I mean, isn't that kind of a hard thing to do?
Yeah.
Like, you look into the whites of their eyes, you see that they're a human. How can you not say, oh, that's a human right there?
And I think that's where many people during this time period was, and especially, and still today, especially, but during this time period with such division over both politics, society, and economics, people like this person named Chickasaw, who was, the book's title was Chickasaw, Mississippi Scout for the Union, by Levi H. Nairn, really understood that there was something more to this war than himself,
Yeah.
more than the South, more than his way of life, more than his family, and really was willing to do what he could to fight for those principles as you just outlined.
Yeah.
So really this identity of liberty and freedom and democracy transcended this regionality between the North and the South, and whatever other factors you want to throw in there. So
Yeah.
ultimately, I think it's important for us to understand is that there's always going to be some main issues that are driving historical events, but
Yeah.
also to understand that there's some underlying stuff that doesn't always get that much attention as you might
Yeah.
see in a history class or in a textbook. That also need to be paid attention to as well. Those different perspectives.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, those different perspectives are always important to look at. I mean, even in our current times, it's important to look at those different opinions and look at the rationale behind them, and try to see the reasoning behind them as well, because there's always decent reasoning to the other person's argument, and it's important to try to understand that, whether you buy into it or not. You don't really have to, but it's important just to listen and try to understand.
Yep. So where does this leave us? I mean, spoiler alert.
North
we are
wins.
still the United States.
Yeah. North wins.
We're not a Confederate States
Nope.
of the America. We
Uh-uh.
are the United States of America. So the Union does win. Spoiler alert,
Yeah,
like you said.
yeah.
But why?
So real quick, the Civil War is 1861. There's a lot of battles between 1861 and 1865 when the war ends. It's almost 4 years exactly. It starts in April of 1861, ends in April of 1865. So basically exactly 4 years. North wins. There's a couple reasons why, really. The North has a few things going for it. They're an urban population, so there's a lot of cities. They have more population than the South.
Yep.
They have more people, which means more manpower, which means bigger army, more people producing things. And they're also industrialized. So while not the entire North is all machinery and production, there's also some farms and things like that, like there are in the South. But there's a whole lot more industrialization in the North than there is in the South. And that's really is what's going to win it for the North is in the time of war, they're able to produce things. When the South is looking to gain allies with England or France or anyone who's willing to send them some guns or some wool to create some more uniforms or whatever, they're looking for people to send them supplies.
Yep.
While the North is able to produce more supplies on their own because of that population and industrialization.
It's kind of interesting perspective to put it into today's society is, we have different populations from state to state. We have different type of economies from state to state. And each state that we have in the Union really holds its own I guess value, you could say, to the rest of the United States or even the world. For example, California, according to Business Insider,
Oh my
is
goodness.
the fifth biggest
Fifth
in the
largest
world.
in the world.
Fifth
Yep.
largest in the world. So I mean, if you just took California, carved it off the United States map, we would be taking one of the top 5 economies in the entire world. That's probably assuming that the United States is also in there as well, because
The
California
United
is
States would
there as
still be
well.
number 1.
It's-
China would be number 2. But California by itself, as a measure of GDP, is number 5 in the world.
Exactly.
That is better than almost every other country. So that
and-
is insane. That's how productive we are. Good job,
Good job,
California.
California. However, this also highlights kind of similarities to the Union in the North
Yep.
during this time period. Is the North had that type of economic and political power in the region. They had the ability and the stability to carry on, whereas the South was much more volatile, much more reliant on agriculture, very much more reliant on trade, whereas the North was able to kind of go along with business as usual. So this idea that industrialization and popularization and also urbanization creates these main aspects as to why the Union in the North was able to kind of prevail in this kind of long, drawn-out war. But really, that leaves us with the legacy of the Civil War and understanding where we're at today. So a question that I want to pose to you, Mr. Nunn, is, what was this cruel 4-year war fought over? What is the lasting legacy behind these 4 bloody years where brothers in arms took up arms against other brothers in arms?
Well, and it's interesting that you put it that way. And I think one of the ways that you can kind of visualize it is by watching the wonderful movie Gettysburg. You hear about how these...
It's a good movie.
It is a fantastic movie, but you also see how these people from the North and the South, even though, I'm speaking generals-wise, even though they were fighting for different sides, they all knew each other.
Yep.
They were aware of who the others were. They were friends. Many of them had gone to West Point together. I mean, these people were well acquainted with each other, and before the war, quite often they would spend time together. Their families would spend time together. This is that kind of war. That's how personal it is.
So it'd be kind of like if a hypothetical war broke out between Tracy and Mountain House or Tracy and Lathrop or Manteca.
Yeah.
You would have people that know each other that are fighting against each other because they have different perspectives or ideologies.
Absolutely. And personally, they're very close. Which is why I always tell my students, so children don't ever forget this, that it doesn't matter what your political ideals are, what your ideology is. You're going to walk in as friends. You need to walk out as friends too. So do not ever come into my classroom and let something that we talk about inside of my classroom split you apart. It's not that important. You do not want to be fighting a war against someone just because they do not think that Trump is the best in the world, right? So it's not that important, people. So let's go back to the legacy. So there's some different kinds of legacies that kind of are still lasting from the Civil War. And we saw a lot of this in the last few years. I think the biggest one is you saw this in the news when southern states were pulling down Confederate general statues.
Yep.
And people were just up in arms about it because you're pulling down our legacy. These are our ancestors. This is our history. This is where we come from. Well, people, they're pulling down racist people. They're pulling down people who were contributing to keeping slavery as an institution in America. And so the idea is
and,
that,
and they're not trying to erase the memory of the past, because that would be even more damaging.
Absolutely.
But really, we're trying to really reshape what it is that defines our nation, and what it is that the legacy that we want to leave behind. Is it the legacy that we want to leave behind, these monuments and these statues that kind of symbolize to individuals or groups or other countries, even false, I guess, false ideas of what the United States is all about? Or is it that, do we want to kind of remain with the status quo and kind of keep this racist ideology going that has ceased to exist still from this Civil War and far past beyond?
well, Chitwood, I do have to say that in this world, I hope for one of two things. I hope to have a statue erected in my honor,
Okay.
or a school named after me. That's my goal in life.
both of
That's what I
those?
want. Yeah. Well, one of the other.
We might be able to do one of them.
One of the two
Both
would be
of them.
fantastic. Now,
Can we just have a statue of your beard? Would that be acceptable? Like,
can't
not the face,
you
just the
can't-
beard.
Why would you want the beard without my face?
Oh, because then
it completes the beauty.
Yeah,
Look,
because
I
then
mean, look at this.
then people could go up to the statue and then be like, okay, look, I have Mr. Nunn's beard
Yeah.
on me.
Yeah. So do I measure up?
Yeah.
Now, I would want a statue erected of me,
Okay.
or a building named after me, because of the positive contributions that I've made to the community, not based on bad ideals that I have. I do not want a statue erected in my honor because I went out and got into a bunch of fights.
Yep.
I mean, I do only fight to the death, and I've never lost. So
true.
that's a fact.
54 and 0.
54-0. So I mean, I don't
Until our
want.
fight.
I
will pull your beard at some point.
I do not want a statue erected in my honor because of the bad things that I did, or because of the bad logic that I believed in. I do not want people to be like, oh yeah, that's the guy right there who perpetrated division in society. I don't want a statue of me for that reason.
And we can instead choose to focus on uplifting individuals that promoted positivity
Absolutely.
in society rather than negativity. And I think that's where a lot of that went.
Yes.
And to go along with that, there's still this long-lasting idea and division between us versus them, where we have feelings of some people having their history forgotten and replaced with some that are being championed. This kind of division in general, I think, is not necessarily something that has ever been fixed in the United States. There's always been division, and honestly, I mean, if you look back to the founders of our federal government, they primarily they're on both sides of the political spectrum.
Sure.
And honestly, we would not have our government the way that we have it without those different perspectives.
But I do want to point out that that came out of a compromise.
It's true.
Compromise, while has been seen as a dirty word, as something that I'm not going to get my way and you're not going to get your way, so no one's going to be happy. No. The longest lasting democracy in the world is our government, and it is because
Of compromise.
of compromise. So people, compromise. It's okay. Some of what you like is great. Some of what I like is great. Let's get the great stuff and push aside the crappy stuff.
And work together, find a solution, not have it kind of create this logjam in society.
Absolutely.
So I mean, and this is something that we struggle with still to this day. This is something that the United States and following the Civil War struggled immediately and for quite some time in a much more a drastic sense in the idea that following the Civil War, you have this period of Reconstruction where the nation's just trying to put themselves back together with, and following.
But
this
let's be honest,
great
they're
division.
half-assed about it.
That is true.
Very half-assed
And they're
about
trying
it.
to just kind of put band-aids.
Checking a box.
They're definitely trying to put band-aids on a problem, on a wound that is hemorrhaging, where they should have just sewn it up and moved forward.
Yeah.
But I think that also leads us to kind of where we're at today in terms of why we're still dealing with a lot of problems that could have been addressed in Reconstruction or prior to then, or dating back to the foundation of the United States. Is that some people argue that the Reconstruction, this period of time where the nation is coming together following the Civil War, as the first 10 to 30 years following the Civil War.
Yeah.
Some would argue that it's still happening today, and we're still trying to put the piece of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
So really, I think it comes back to that idea of compromise. And when we're talking about compromising, I think we should talk about compromising ourselves with respecting people's time, because I think our podcast is
kinda long.
quickly
We're
reaching about 40
we're
minutes.
40 minutes now.
So let's come to a conclusion.
come to
here.
the end. Well, one of the things that I do want to bring up, though, is I do quite often see the Confederate flag flying around. And it's something that I've seen quite a bit. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's my ancestry, or it's my history. Well, that Confederate flag, what it stands for is a separation from America. So what you're saying is, I'm going to ditch America if they do not do what I say. And part of the problem that I have with that flag is that it was erected to continue to enslave Americans. That's what it was created for. I mean, when you boil the Civil War down to what it was, that flag was created as a rallying point
For oppression.
to keep oppression. Yep. And so when I see people flying it, I'm like, what are you doing? Do you have any idea what you're saying? Sure, it's a pretty flag. Sure, you might be saying states' rights over federal rights. But what you're really saying is, I believe in Southern ideals. And one of those ideals I believe in is slavery. And that's not okay.
No. So, I think with that, when we're at the end of our content so far for this historical portion, I think we'll leave it at that, and we'll come back to some of these issues of symbolism and division and other problems that are facing our nation back then and still is facing our nation today. But I think I want to end maybe this podcast on more of a
Super
cheerful
positive note.
or a positive note.
Positive.
And let's talk about like what now specifically with our society. We talked about what we're doing to keep ourselves busy. We've all we left school on Friday and were given the kind of directive shortly thereafter to
not do anything,
not do really anything, and kind of self-quarantine and focus on our health and our health of our family and our community. But really, what does that mean moving forward? Granted, yes, we have these ideas in place on how we could do some distance learning that the district has put out for us so far. But ultimately, and I've told myself and my students this for the past week or two now, is what can we do to hold ourselves accountable? How can we, especially in a time like now, hold ourselves accountable for what we want to gain from our own education? To be honest, me and Mr. Nunn, we're fantastic people. I like to think that when we walk through that door,
one of us is better than the other,
and we're
you
not
get to
say
decide.
But I like to think that when we walk through the door, we try to make our classroom as positive as it can be, as safe as it can be, and an awesome learning environment to be in. But let's be honest, we are not the only people that have a stake in the education for the future of our nation. And to be honest, 99.9% of it has to do with the students and ourselves as individuals. And being in this position where we're trying to understand how we should move forward and waiting for other people to tell us what to do might give us some clarity about ourselves and what we can tell ourselves to do in this time period. How is it that we can help ourselves learn and grow in this time period of uncertainty when we have been told what to do or been being for the past X amount of years being told how to learn. We can tell ourselves how to learn. We can choose how to learn. We can choose to learn.
We could choose to learn nothing. I mean,
We could
couldn't
also
you have been
choose,
playing Jedi Fallen Order right now?
I will not divulge how much time I've actually spent in that game over the last week. However, I will say the time that I've spent on the game is uncomparable to the amount of time that I spent doing grading research papers that just got turned into me, planning for leadership and student activities next year, trying to understand how we can move forward as a school with such a major disruption, trying to understand where our portion, where my portion of responsibility moving forward, even past this year, can get better and can progress, even though we're in this kind of period of stoppage. So really trying to understand where we're at academically and holding ourselves accountable is going to be important for us during this time period to keep busy, but also trying to understand how can we come together as a community during this time period. This type of situation with COVID-19 or coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, is not an individual thing.
No.
It is not something that we as an individual can do, but it's something that we can take part of and fix. Start taking part of and fix as individuals, and ultimately contributing to the broader community that we live in to keep ourselves safe and healthy and get us on the right track to getting back to everyday life.
Yeah, and let's be honest. I mean, the sooner we kind of quarantine ourselves, the more we follow what we're being told to do, the quicker we can get back to our normal lives. Because the point here is to kind of keep us away from each other so we're not transmitting the disease. That's what this whole panic thing is.
We're doing a pretty good job of that right now, aren't we?
You and I are not. Everyone else is. So stay in your homes, dorks. But let's end with something really rad. So what can you do to keep busy? So we'll talk with Mr. Chitwood. Mr. Chitwood, what would you like to do to keep yourself busy during this time?
Oh man, just to keep busy, not having to do with anything with school. I have a backyard that is unfinished. When we first bought the house, it's just dirt, and my dogs go out there and get all dirty. I would like to be able to look back at this time period and be like, man, you know what? I learned how to landscape a backyard, and that is going to be a big goal of mine. Is if I have the opportunity to, that backyard's going to look nice and pristine.
Good.
Yeah. So
that's very cool.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
What about you, Mr. Nunn?
Well, I'm continuing to ride my bike around Mountain House. I'm trying to come back not fatter than I was when I left.
It's good.
So, yeah, riding around Mountain House, I think, will be one of my main things that I do. And I've done that every day since Monday. Playing some football with my son. That's the one sport he likes. He hates every other sport, but just loves football. So playing some football with my son, I think, will be a lot of fun. And just listening to a lot of music. Mr. Chitwood, what kind of music would you suggest? What if you were listening to one band right now, who would you listen to?
If I was listening to one band right now, I mean, the students know that from the music that I play every single day, I mean, it can range from various artists to various artists, but largely, I mean, I'm a pop person. I'm also a country person.
Yeah.
But I think when it comes down to something that I've been hooked on listening to, both the Red Hot Chili Peppers and
yes,
in addition to that, Streetlight Manifesto has really been grabbing my attention.
Solid choices.
What about you, Mr. Nunn?
I have really been in a Red Hot Chili Peppers mood lately. And you and I have talked before about how I don't like the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yep.
In the last month or so,
growing on you?
That's become a lie.
Yeah,
I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So listen to them.
So you're saying maybe try new things, you know?
Try new things.
Trying to branch out of the status
Absolutely.
quo.
So yeah, I would say if you're going to listen to some good music, any of the super popular Red Hot Chili Peppers stuff I think is really good. There's one song that I'm stuck on right now. It's called The Adventures of Raindance Maggie. Fantastic.
Okay.
It's a really good
I'll
song.
have to give it a try.
You will definitely have to give it a try. So The Adventures of Rain Dance Maggie. Good song. But also, I've listened to a new band called Tsunami Bomb.
Tsunami Bomb.
Yeah, so
Okay.
good. It's punk.
I don't know
But
why I
it's
said
so
that
good.
like Obama.
So
We
it's a
like
good
to
it's a good
listen to
band.
Tsunami Bomb, and it's a good band. But anyways, I think what it comes down to is use this time wisely to really hold yourself accountable to your own education. Hold yourself accountable to how you want to grow as an individual, but also to hold yourself accountable and being able to look back at this time period where we're being forced to close our doors and shut ourselves in to self-quarantine, to look back and say, I really spent that time as best as I could have. I didn't just sit at home, sit on the couch and scroll through TikTok the entire day. I actually spent some time
Listening to this podcast.
listening to this podcast and growing and helping myself become a better individual by the end of it. So with that, I mean, you guys all know how to get a hold of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
We both have our digital platforms. Edmodo, use Edmodo Remind.
I love Edmodo. I don't use Remind, but I do Edmodo. You have my Gmail. You have my school
Same.
email. You know how to get a hold of me, so get a hold of me.
And sharing this with your friends that might not be on Edmodo or might not have the direct links to this kind of stuff might be useful. And just saying, hey, we wanted to put something out to say, hey,
We're thinking about you.
Thinking about
That's
you.
exactly what this is.
And we're thinking about what we love and what we miss and what we want to get back to eventually, but also to just proclaim to you that we're just a couple bored teachers with nothing to do. So with that, I think we might sign off.
Yeah, I'm gonna end this by saying, use this time to become the you want to be.
That's a good one.
We'll see you in a few weeks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
When you were born, you were not alone. Nothing was carved into the stone quite yet. But don't forget, you heard someone say it won't get better than this. That was the sound of your father as he held you up to your mother. No one will ever know love as pure as the one that you felt right then. They held you up, they held you up, and everybody else that fell to the wayside. This is the start, the beginning, the prologue of the tale that you're spinning. A million synonyms will never come close to describe the feeling. Don't ever leave, 'cause if you do, dear, I guarantee that you'll regret the day you did. And you'll miss all the simple things, and you'll see everything you ever loved start fading till there's nothing left. Oh, I believe that every broken bone was meant to be. When it heals, it will be stronger than it was before. And I'll see the things that I pretend that I don't see, and I'll keep them in my head, love, if only for memories. So now you're young and you feel alone, despite friends, family, and all the good things now surrounding you. You can't help thinking, oh, there's gotta be some more to do. When all the things that you cherish turn into burdens, then there is no other path to take. You know what you gotta do, but you don't know how. They'll hold you back, they'll hold you down, and you're gonna feel bad, but you know that you gotta get out. This is your pain, your dilemma. Do you stay in the time where they raised ya, or will you sail away? Pull the anchor and go headed for the come what may. You have to leave, 'cause if you don't, dear, you'll never see see, the things that I pretend that I don't see, and I keep them in my head, love, if only for memories. So now you're old, raising your own two souls. You built yourself a home, you finally settled down. You've seen the world, but your heart never left this town. They have the eyes of their mother, the kind of crooked teeth of their father. No one will ever know a love as pure as the love that you feel for them. You'll hold them up, you'll hold them up, and everybody else will fall to the wayside. There is no end, no beginning on this merry-go-round we call living. Someday you will return every single ounce of the love you were given. Someday they'll go, and when they leave home, you will be grateful for the lesson that you learned. You had to travel half the world to realize what you knew all along, that everything will end up where it belongs. I believe that every broken bone is meant to be. When it heals, it will be strong.